Good afternoon. My name is Laura Escalante and I work on the alumni team at McMaster. My colleague Kathleen D'Amico and I are thrilled to be here with you today as we welcome Thomas Brasch. If you have any questions during our webinar, please submit them in the Q&A. Thomas graduated from McMaster in 1984 and 1986, then devoted nearly 30 years to public education before embarking on his second career as a photographer. Completely self-taught, he showcases his perceptions of beauty in ways that have led to shows both locally and internationally. We are thrilled to have Thomas here today to share the skills he has learned about the art of photography. Please join us in welcoming Thomas.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Thomas Brasch. I'm a self-taught photographer. I've been doing it for a very long time, but I don't want to waste your time today. I may go a little fast, but not to worry. All this information will be available to you afterwards. The first few slides in this presentation is a little more technical, but again, that information will be sent out, and it's necessary in order to understand what's going on with photography, with composition, with the purpose of your your image taking. So let's get started. This email address as well, brash.photo.art@gmail.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out as well if you have any additional personal questions that might come later. So there's no problem with that. So this is about making great photos, because sometimes what we see and what we take are not always the same thing. So sometimes we have to correct for that. This is a lot of information right now, but all I'm saying is you have to decide right away in the beginning. You should get organized. Are your pictures going to be only for screen, or are they going to be for print, or for both? It's an important decision because you have to know how to store your images as well. So many times I hear people say, well, I lost my phone and I lost all my pictures. So I think it's very advisable if you can set up some sort of cloud system. And here we have a few examples. Dropbox is a popular one, iPhotos as well, Google Photos, and you can set that up on your camera. But if you don't like uploading images to the cloud, another alternative, many phones now come with an ability to put in a micro SD card. And these little tiny chips are great. It almost looks like this here. Anyway, I use that as well. Sometimes it just makes transfer to my computer a lot easier if I can slip that back out and then slip it into my computer, and then I can download as well. So it's something to consider. Screen or print? Well, this is a big debate. I know there's a lot of numbers here, but if you look at the diagram on the left, you can see two different grids. The one on the there's two squares. The one on the left with 72 dots per inch, or actually pixels per inch, is your screen resolution. So that's how computers, your phone, anything that glows at you, that's the resolution you see. And a pixel is actually one point of light. So you're actually looking at an agglomeration of these little points of light. However, for print, it has to be much denser, more compact, because you want that resolution there, and you need a lot more information in order to make a clear picture. So these initial numbers here that show back, these are actually back and front. These are actually my own camera, my own cell phone camera. So it's 4032 by 2268 pixels. That's my usual camera that I use. If I divide that by 300, that tells me I have information to make a good size print, 13 by almost 8 inches. I tend to always maximize that, and I can always crop later. Sometimes you can even blow it up from that size, but not maybe more than 150%. However, for a cell phone, for instance, I took the example for an iPhone here, you only actually need this many pixels for your screen. And it's two numbers because it's a grid. So that's half the amount of information. So if you're a person that's not going to upload to the cloud and not save on a card and save it all on your phone, then I would suggest making smaller pictures. And we can get to that in a second when I look at the setting. However, I think most of us like to have the maximum amount of information, and we can save and edit it. So again, a lot of information, but this time I've carefully put this a few circles and numbers. On your phone, always choose the largest numbers and you can edit or crop it later. So on the right-hand side, I have the two setting screens for my phone. And at number 1, I've chosen the maximum resolution there, which is a 16 by 9 megapixel configuration there. And my front camera, usually the front cameras are of a lesser resolution, and that's the oval there by number 2. If you're going to be using a point and shoot digital camera, same thing, you would use the maximum resolution. They do give you an option, and more than likely they will ask you to save it as a JPEG. Try and do that with the least compression. It will tell you something like fine or maximum or something like that. You want to keep as much detail as you can. I do have an example of what a compressed JPEG looks like on a subsequent slide. If you are using a digital DSLR, or I know my phone also does it though, I would suggest saving as a RAW file, or DNG stands for digital negative. Those are very big files, but if you've got the camera already, I would imagine you have a large SD card and you can save all that information. So again, another camera setting here, as I said, on the phone at number 1. I would only use that if I actually plan on taking those types of raw photos, digital negatives. It's only available to me in the pro mode, so I have to actually set everything manually. Well, that's not what I'm doing with my cell phone. I'm pulling my cell phone out quickly and snapping a picture. So I want it all in automatic. What I do have though for other selections is I have selected at number 2 the HDR, high definition, which will sometimes enhance pictures nicely. Number 3 gives me an option of putting an overlay on my viewfinder, and it's a 3x3 grid, and you'll see why that's important shortly when we talk about composition. I've naturally selected, I think it was a default number 4, where you can choose tracking autofocus, so it just keeps things in focus. And I have chosen this. It is usually on by default. Some people find it to be a privacy issue. But number 5, location tags. I actually like to know where my pictures were taken, and I am hooked up with Google Timelines, and it can actually show me the actual geographic location where each photo was taken. This is what happens when you compress an image too much. These are JPEGs that I exaggerated this, but I compressed it, and then just to show you. On the left in image number 1, that was that blue sky that you saw on the title slide. You can see there's that effect called banding, and it's also kind of jagged. We actually call that the jaggies. And on the right, number 2, that's a bit of the horizon line with the rocks against that sky. And you can see how there's that hard edge. It seems like that. It's just, this is what happens with these files. The JPEG stands for Joint Photographic, whatever group, and they have come up with the system being able to compress a file. And if you do it too much, it's not great, but it can be pretty good now. So RAW mode, this is, again, if you're not going to be shooting RAW, just ignore this screen for 1 second. This is only if you can afford the space. It's great if you're bringing it into any image editing software, but there is a price to pay. So if you look at number 1, the red arrow, this is the same picture. I took this picture in a RAW, and it comes up as a RAW and a JPEG. So as a JPEG at that resolution, it's 2.64 megabytes. But if you look down at number 2, the other arrow, that's the RAW file. That's the actual digital negative. It's 17.86 megabytes. So it is almost 7 times bigger. Other things to look at, 3 would also say that's the same resolution. I'm just showing that for that. 4, that's that geotagging. So that picture shows me exactly where I took. This is great for when you took that trip 2 years ago to Prague and you can't remember what the name of that church was where you took that picture. You can actually scroll to that day and then find it. And you would be able to find the name then on the map. So, but usually after these edits, you save anyways as a JPEG or another format. Rules are meant to be broken. So I'm going to talk about some of the composition now, and I'm going to mention some rules. And as usual, there's always an exception to the rule. What I would suggest to you if you want to actually improve your picture taking abilities is just to experiment with your own shots. And also look at pictures from other people and say, why does this one appeal to me? Find out what you like and mimic it. What I do is I follow a friend of mine. He takes excellent pictures. He's completely self-taught. Usually it's either a point and shoot or his iPhone. And we met him on a bike trip. It was pretty amazing, and started talking. And so I started following his Instagram. And these are some of his images here. They're just a lot of them from when he is going on trips or even just walking his dog. The one on the left here with the spiral staircase, that one's important in that, you know, you've got the idea of leading lines that draw you into the picture. The middle picture is also very interesting because he's inverted it. He's captured a reflection. I'm sure he probably just took that on one of his dog walks. And as well, this one on the right. But of course, you are going to get great pictures in Charleston, North Carolina. It's a very scenic city, apparently. I like the use of his shadows here and how he's kind of, you realize this is a church without actually seeing a sign that it is. These are some others that he took. The portrait on the left is just a candid of a woman in London, England, in one of those markets. The fountain in the middle is again from one of his dog walks. It's a somewhat famous fountain. He seems to be always walking at midnight. And on the right, you may recognize this as Brookfield Place. Why I like this photo is, again, you have these leading lines, and we know lots of people have taken pictures of this, but what I like with Chuck's image here is he has put a person in it, just a shadow of a person, to give you some sort of perspective or context. So one of these ideas of composition is this rule of thirds. Remember when I mentioned the grid, the 3x3 grid? This is what you would see. I don't think you would see the circles, but you would see these lines. And it's always best to line things up with these lines or put the main point of interest in one of those circles. So in the image on the left, which is the title image for this presentation, you'll notice how I put the horizon on the lower third, and then the sky takes up the other 2/3. It's a way of creating more interest. If you always put the horizon in the middle, it becomes a very static, boring picture. You're not quite sure what to look at. But in this case, that horizon with the outcropping of the rocks just adds some drama to that softness with the sky. With this picture here on the right, I took that one during our bizarre snow day just a few weeks ago in spring. That's in the necropolis here in Cabbagetown. And I decided to put the tombstone in that one area where the two lines intersect. It sort of creates a bit more of drama and interest. Actually, when I took that picture, to be quite honest, I'm not actually that great with taking pictures. I'm good at editing pictures. So when I cropped this picture, I made sure that tombstone was in the right place. I do have a video on how I created this, and we will provide you with a list of those videos later. You'll be able to see how I worked on this image. Composition again, somebody had a question about negative space, and I had to think about that for a second because I never really knew the term per se, but I realized I was doing it. So for instance, the image on the left, I mean, there's so much blackness around there, you are forced to draw attention to that Buddha's face. The image on the right, I wish I could take credit for that, but that's one of Chuck's images. So that just speaks so much to me because there's two things. It's the smallness of the birds and the vastness of the sky. And independently, you just wouldn't get that. I mean, a picture of a bird, closer up wouldn't be as important because you would lose that perspective. So this is just a very strong picture. I don't know how he does it. He's good at it. Leading lines, another rule that people like to use sometimes, but it's lining yourself up so that there's some sort of lines, either drawing the viewer into the view or pointing to certain things. So these trays of different powders here in the museum, you can see how this triangular shape taken from this direction really leads you into the image. As well, there's the lines of the wood, the wood flooring. On the right, this is a waterfall in Iceland, and there's that small pathway where you have a few people. So again, you get that perspective, but the pathway leads you into that precipice where there are more people staring at that waterfall. But by the same token, that waterfall is flowing this way. So you've got a few interesting dynamics going here. And it just kind of brings you around almost back into a full circle here. Lighting, very important for pictures. We all love a sunny day. We don't have enough of them. Today is a perfect example of this, but believe it or not, today is a better day for taking pictures than a sunny day. Bad light is direct sunlight at noon. It flattens people, it washes out colors. Sometimes you can't avoid it. You meet up with friends, you have to take that picture. Best times to take pictures, though, are 1 hour after sunrise and 1 hour before sunset. We call that the golden hour. Or 1 hour before sunrise, if you want to get up that early, and 1 hour after sunset, which isn't too hard to say up for. We call that the blue hour. The reason for that is because that's basically the color of the light. If you had a white sheet of paper and you had it in that light, it would either slightly look yellow or blue. Overcast days are great, creates a soft light, soft box. So you don't get those hard shadows in somebody's face. And window light is also good. So even in this presentation, I've arranged it so that I have a little bit more window light in my face as I'm speaking so that there's some definition as opposed to full frontal light, which would flatten my face. And this is, again, this whole temperature color spectrum guide with the lighting. So you can see how I've circled sunrise, sunset. That's the golden hour. That's, the general sort of color of light that's shining on everything, that gives everything a nice warmness. And that's also what you would get with, for instance, candlelight. On the other side, the blue hour, it's a darker, but it's a whiter light or bluer light. And partially cloudy is just a little bit to the left of that. So portraits, again, a few more. These aren't even rules, just suggestions. I like to do sometimes full body portraits, environmental type portraits, where you see the person doing what they do best or enjoying a moment. 3/4 profile, like this picture here on the right, this person, who happens to be my husband, is sort of turned over to the side and slightly looking off, or could be looking directly. You will see a lot of pictures of my husband in this presentation, only because he is the worst subject for photography. Usually, if you ask him to take his picture, he stiffens up like a board, and the face almost kind of contorts in a fake smile. But with this, I was able to engage him in a conversation. We were having breakfast in Costa Rica, and I just kept on snapping every once in a while. And I managed to get this. It was perfect lighting as well. Shooting down might be more flattering sometimes. And as I said, putting your subject at ease with some conversation is also a great tip. Here's an example of blue hour. And again, it's a portrait, a side view. We've got a bit of this whole depth of field. You notice the background's also a little bit blurry. That does happen as well in the digital cameras on your phone, but not always. It depends on the lighting conditions. But if you have a digital DSLR, you can control that. But again, you can see the colors are more whitish, bluish, as opposed to, oh, this is an overcast. I have the golden slide next. This is more of a soft light. Again, you can see this idea of rule of thirds. The surfer is here on the first third of the photograph on that axis. And this is what I would call something more like an environmental portrait. If I actually knew this woman, you know, I could arrange more of a photo shoot with that. Here you have an example of the golden hour. So you get your longer shadows, saturated light, more colors. I also like this image because I have the reflection of the man. Notice it's not, I didn't do the rule of thirds here. So as I said, rules are meant to be broken. This is an environmental portrait I took. I just snapped it with my phone, but this is what I'm talking about. I'm trying to show you some of my bad photos so that you can see how I can correct them with some cropping. So first of all, notice that the lighting is slightly orangey more. That's part of incandescent lighting. I could correct for that, but I'd rather not because it leaves a certain amount of warmth to it. But in this picture, I have this mess on the right-hand side in that circle, and I've got this extra space in front of my friend Bob here. And so I cropped it. And now I have this idea more of rule of thirds, if I were to do this, right here, and right here, and right here. Plus I have this whole idea of this leading lines here. So it's all sort of drawing me in. Side lighting, if you're indoors trying to take a picture, it's often very difficult. Go by a window. Go beside a window. Here on the left, we were in Seville and it was right beside a window. It was a very unassuming moment. I just snapped a photo and it was done as it was in the camera. On the right, sometimes you can use reflective surfaces. So this golden statue from Ai Weiwei here in this museum gave a nice kind of golden reflection onto my face here. This was an actual official portrait I did. This is my yoga teacher. I took a series of images, but the one I finally settled on was the largest one here, because there's very little in the background to distract from the actual view. I think the facial expression is perfect. There's just a hint of a smile. You can see some color in the eye. There's some highlights in the hair. So I think this, to me, is about the best portrait picture I've ever taken. Everybody's going to do a selfie, so sometimes you should just need to make it somewhat interesting. Shoot down upon yourself, give some context, some background to it. So again, here we're in this desert hike and we're a little tired, a little bit cold, and it was just a fun thing to do. And again, if you notice in the back, the sky is a little bit gray. It's because it was overcast. It was perfect lighting. If this was a beautiful sunny day, I would have many more shadows in my face. And you can work with that, but it doesn't always work. Same day, clouds in the sky produces a nice soft light. But here again, this is a portrait, but also a landscape. So I have these leading lines. I have this pathway here. I have a rainbow in the sky coming down here. There's this valley as well. And this is the town down here. It's not fully evident in this photo here. Then also you have my husband, Simon, here, looking off into the distance. So it kind of creates a certain engagement. What is he looking at? Here was a perfect photo I took, and afterwards I realized my big mistake. I have a post coming out of my daughter's head. So you can see that right here. And I said, well, I have to get this photo. I have to fix it. So the best thing I did was just to crop it really tightly. I just focused in on her face. I did have some fill-in flash for the moment because you can see that in her face. There's a bit of a glow, and you can also see in her pupils, there's a bit of a light. And you can force your camera to do that. Usually our cell phone cameras, by default, it's on auto flash. You can force the flash, have it fire every time. And it's sometimes advisable to do that during a day where there is light, so you just don't get any of those shadows. Action shot, you also do what you can. I know somebody did ask about film and digital, and this is one time I'm going to tell you that digital far outweighs the benefits of film, because I probably took 20, 25 shots and out of all those 25 shots, this is the one that turned out, because these people are in action. They're moving, flamenco dancers and singers here. And I like this because I almost have everybody's face in here. He's looking at her. I almost had her and him. And even though there's people in the background, I sort of half cropped them out. It was a tricky shot to get in that respect, but I am satisfied with it. Another perspective for any kind of portrait as well. Again, action shots, looking down. I was on a pier. There was a surfer in the water below me. Perfect moment. And probably this was more of the golden hour. Again, I already spoke about fill and flash, but this was a perfect example of fill and flash. Colorado is extremely sunny and beautiful, beautiful skies. The light was coming in from the side. This is more maybe 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock light. There would have definitely have been a shadow in Simon's face here, but when I forced the flash here, it fills that in nicely. You don't get that darkness. That's very hard to work with and edit. You can do that. But actually what happens is you get a nice kind of glow in the face and you've got a brilliantly lit background. Group shots indoors. Again, overhead lighting can be very nasty. I would suggest again some sort of fill and flash if you can. I'm not a fan of it. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it's too strong, but in this case it seemed to work. Again, notice the light's a little bit more orange. That's because it's indoor incandescent light. Action shot. So I did manage to get this shot again with digital cameras. You can take up to 20, 25 and not worry about the film. And monkeys in Costa Rica are very photogenic. I do have my rule of thirds here. You can see the grid here on the left, and you can just imagine that overlaid on that. And the one monkey was just fortunate enough to be sort of looking in my direction. I have a lot of bad monkey pictures, but this is the good one here. Another idea for a portrait is again an action shot. So when people are not paying attention to you, that's sometimes the best time to take the picture because they're not overly posed. So we were posing for somebody else, and you can see, I like this effect too of taking a picture of somebody taking a picture. So we're in there. I do that sometimes when I'm in museums. I take pictures of people taking pictures, and just kind of a neat effect. Candids are sometimes the best. Landscape and architecture. Sometimes those wonderful buildings just don't fit in your field of view. And this is a beautiful museum institute in Lisbon, and it was huge. It was an extremely sunny day. So, but this is actually the photo from my camera. So I decided to concentrate just on one aspect. I was looking at the textures and the lines here. But unfortunately, I do have Mr. Pigeon here. So, I mean, I could leave him in here as part of negative space. And I do have this. I didn't like that as well. I edit those. And I also edit for the fact that this white doesn't look white to me. This ended up being the final photo. I took out the pigeon and I also took out this extra clutter here. And I get a very crisp, clean, I've brightened it up, I've made it look white again, and I feel like I was there that day. It was just such blue sky with this white building. Architecture, you know, sometimes finding a focal point and working with that. I like doing the idea of reflections. This is in Seville, Spain, Mujajar Fountain. Framing is also a great idea for architecture when you can put something within something else. So this is the monastery in Lisbon, Geronimo's, and this is looking out from a window and a portico, and I've kind of focused on those buildings. So I've given some attention to it. So I get the flavor of the place without necessarily having to take a picture of the whole place. Again, some days you just can't help but getting that great shot. And if you, again, if you're in Lisbon and you're in this Convent de Carmo, I mean, it's just an amazing view to see this convent that it was a victim of the earthquake way back a couple of hundred years ago. They never rebuilt it. They kept it this way. And it was such a blue, crisp sky. So I'm actually framing the sky. I do have symmetry, but I also still have this idea of rule of thirds, not so much horizontally. And there's a lot of simplicity here. There's basically two colors, white and blue, very soothing for the eyes. Architecture again, shooting up, looking up at a skylight. This is just a shopping mall in San Francisco. Landscape tips and tricks. So you should actually turn, we tend to use our phones in a upright position. You should, if you want to, take your phone and tip it over and put it in landscape, or sometimes phones actually have a panorama mode. And I do that as well, and I have an example of that. But I usually like to find some sort of focal point that I can give a point of reference so that it's a bit more meaningful to me. This picture on the right, I love it, but there isn't really a focal point. That can be anywhere, but if you do recognize it, there is a bit of road here going, and you might recognize this as Big Sur in California. So I do have a video on this as well, how I made this, but the image on the left is the one I took, and I thought this would be great to get this little oasis of palm trees here and here. So it kind of gave context to how big this place was, because otherwise this could be a small hill, this, or it could be a huge a mountain. But with these edits here, then I was able to darken some things up, make the sky more dramatic, and bring a lot more attention here to the palm trees here. So this almost gives me that focal central point. Landscape, again, the golden hour, but you can see some of the shadows, but they're forgiving. Again, it's 2/3 sky, 1/3 ocean and landscape. I could technically not even be in that photo and just have it with the lighthouse, move it over a little bit to the right. And that would be then another part of my rule of thirds. It would work as well. As I said, the title picture, I've spoken this about a few times, but again, it's the blue hours. I've got these interesting clouds that kind of, bring attention to it. But I do have also, I have maintained that idea of the rule of thirds. Again, context for your landscape. This crater alone, without the people in it, looks just like any sort of average crater. But here, when you can see people in this, you get a bit more the perspective of how big or grand it is. With the picture on the right, you have the large mountainous region behind, which is emphasized by the size of that house. These are both in Iceland. Again, this was just a lucky shot using the light I had. It was looking down a bridge with the sun behind me, and it was very misty. I did manage to get this rainbow here, circular rainbow. And you may not be able to tell, but this bridge is very high. These aren't pieces of wood, these are boats. That was a very frightening bike trip, that one, crossing that bridge, but it was worth it for the picture. This is actually taken with the panorama mode of my camera. So you all have that. I don't know if you've experimented with it, but you put it in panorama mode and you press the button and you move slowly in one direction. Usually I move to the right, clockwise. You have to move steady and slowly. So for that, what I always suggest is hug your elbows in close to you so that you're not getting that camera shake. The camera will compensate for a bit, but you're trying to maximize the image and not really cause any sort of bizarre aberrations. Again, I have my little focal point here, this rainbow as well as a nice leading line. And then I did a second one of the same thing. So this is greater than 180 degrees. And I included the campsite here. And it gives you a real perspective of what it's hard to believe that that was the same place, but that was. You can see the transition moving from one to the next. Still life. I need to talk about that a little bit. Again, I mentioned this whole idea of depth of field. It has to do with the way a camera focuses and the aperture. Now, cell phone cameras really don't have an aperture. It just takes the picture, but the other digital DSLR cameras do, and you can adjust for that. I do have a way in the editing program to mimic that effect, and we will provide that list for you later. What I like to do is focus in on certain things. So this was a great one to get some texture images. The two stalks here in the front are perfectly in focus, and then as it goes further off, you can see how it gets a little bit blurry. Again, same thing, always advisable to get the eyes in focus, keep them in focus, and then somehow the rest all makes sense. Even though the shoulders of the Buddha here are out of focus, that doesn't matter. And the background's out of focus, which also softens it and brings attention back to the face of the Buddha. And again, some days you have those lucky days. As I said, today is a wonderful day to take pictures if you like to go out in the rain. On this day, I was in Niagara on the lake at the School of Horticulture, and it was a beautiful misty day. You can mimic this if you got a spray bottle and just sprayed some plants. Plants and everything outside looks better when it's wet because you don't have that dryness that washes out color. You get all this vibrance and colors, and this just looks like such a thirst-quenching image here. I do have a video on this as well. We may get to see this or not, but sometimes when you take a picture, the picture on the left, snow turns a bit gray. Well, that's because your camera is compensating for all that extra white. It thinks it has to shift it over. In an editing program, though, I managed to bring the white back out. And this again was the strange snowfall we had a few weeks ago. Somebody mentioned something about product shots and things like this. If you are going to do something like this, you don't need the lights, but I do have that little tent there. And you could bring that by a window or a well-lit area or even outside. It's great because what it does is it eliminates the shadows. And then you're able to bump up the whiteness and end up with the picture here on the right. So that was done right here. And those tents cost about maybe $100. Maybe you can find them cheaper on Amazon, but that's what I bought mine for at a photography store. These are just some examples of some do-it-yourself. I think the person wanted to take a picture of a chair. If you don't want to invest in that paper and that stand, I would try and do something with a white sheet. I mean, if this is a one-time deal, but if you're going to do this a bit more, it's worth even just getting the paper and the stand. I think I saw them on Amazon for about 100 altogether, 150 or to 100, something like that. On the right, it's the same idea. The reason why I included this, you barely notice it at first, but this here is a white card propped up just with a roll of red duct tape. The person did this in order to get some reflected light on the back of the shoes for the picture. It just helps give some definition without creating too many shadows. So it probably narrowed down that heel. Evening and night photography. Somebody asked about taking a picture of the moon. Well, never really happens quite easily. The biggest problem you'll get with night photography, and you'll notice again, if you take a picture at night with your cell phone, it will be brighter than you thought it was, and it'll look extremely grainy. That grain in a digital camera is called noise. It's camera noise, and it's difficult to work with. So you can do it, but you would need a little bit more sophisticated equipment, and you should set things on manual. So you would need a tripod probably. You could try with anchoring your elbows on some sort of tabletop or something as well. And if you really wanted to take a picture of that gorgeous moon, try and get it on the horizon because it will definitely look bigger there. Once it's high up in the sky, it somehow becomes so much smaller. I did manage to find a moon picture amongst one of mine, But I was lucky also to have some cloud there in the sunset. And this picture alone is still rather good. This is the original raw photograph of it. But with my editing program here on the right here, you can see with these sliders, I've adjusted a few things around. I brought the highlights right down and pulled up, eased up on the shadows and bumped up on what's called the dehazing. That's my latest favorite. Anyways, I obtained then this picture, was able to make it a little more crisp here. But I did try to show you a bit more of a close-up with the moon. And you'll notice if you can see that crescent on the image on the right-hand side, there seems to be some pink or purple on the inside crescent. We call that chromatic aberrations. You are going to get that, especially in these low light conditions. So now we get to the fun part, the image editing software. So we've taken all of our okay pictures or sometimes bad pictures and we need to fix them up. I'm not necessarily selling this program, but I love this program because it is free. You don't hear that too often. There is no subscription. There are no ads. There are no annoying, you have to get this game or whatever. There are other free programs, but I found there's usually some ads or something like that. And the problem with those other programs is they actually reduce the file size. So you can't end up with a print ready image. Snapseed allows you to do that. So I have here just a few screenshots of Snapseed, what it looks like inside. And we do have a video here shortly to show you as well. But when you open it up and default image, it defaults to this, what's called styles. And it's this row here. These are all presets. And if that's enough for you, that's fine. You just click on the preset and press OK, and you're ready to go. Sorry about that. I choose the tools menu. And with that, I probably use tune image, details, this once in a while curves, crop a lot, occasionally rotate, selective a lot. Selective allows me to change the brightness or the saturation in one era. This is a preset. There's a few other presets here. Drama is a preset, HDR is a preset, but you can play with those. This healing brush is great for getting spots, unwanted spots like the pigeon out of the steps from that Lisbon shot. And this is what it looks like. So if I choose tune image, I will be working with this sub menu. So I have all these items to play with. Sorry, I have a very trigger happy PowerPoint. So if we could display that one tutorial there, the introduction to Snapseed.
I just wanted to give a quick tour of the tools available in Snapseed. You do have the presets here listed under styles, but I'm going to select tools, and you can see the wide range of different tools that you have here, more than you'll ever need. I do tend to like to use details a lot, just because I like to sharpen up the image just a bit. So I give it a little bit more structure. Naturally, when we take pictures, they're a little fuzzy. I'm going to go back to tools. You can see here that I have in the menu, if I click and hold and move up and down, brightness, contrast, saturation, ambience, highlights, shadows, and warmth. To give you an idea of what each one does, you can play with it. So you can see the brightness, contrast, saturation, and with incandescent light that can be excessive. Ambiance affects both contrast and saturation at the same time. Highlights would bring up automatically highlights, so I actually might dial this down a bit for this photo. Shadows, since there are shadows here and my one dog is a little darker, I am going to pull that up a bit so that you don't have as many strong shadows. Plus, I don't have a shadow in my face then. Warmth, this is where you can play with the fact, now this is a complicated image because you have outdoor light and indoor light, but if you make it warmer, it'll look more like indoor light, and if you pull it over to the left, you get more of the outdoor light. So I might just dial a little bit back on the warmth to get the outdoor light, which is a cooler light. Press OK, go back to Tools, and I'm going to crop this image in a standard 5x4 so that I can choose this image to print later, and then select OK.
Okay, so all of those videos, which I actually made for this presentation, but we don't have the time to see them all, will be available to you at this link here. These are mine, but I also found these here, which I'm sure are probably much better done than mine. Mine were just quickly done on the fly, and it was stuff that I use. So I did want to leave some time for questions though, and I think we pretty much covered everything. Sorry, I've just thrown that up. That was actually some of my own work. So are there any questions at the moment?
Great tips, Thomas. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. We have had some questions submitted. Now, I know you talked about digital versus 35 millimeters, but is there anything else you'd like to add on that?
Definitely. Okay, so it is a point of debate. I started in film. I swore I'd never go digital. Here I am, digital. I think what tipped the scale for me was the fact that the grain in the sensor, the actual sensor pixel, became smaller than the grains of film. Film is great, and if you want to actually explore that as a hobby and then deal with the chemicals, you will have difficulties finding somebody to process that film, or if you want to go further on, but you can do that. The problem is if you're doing some sort of action shots, 35 millimeter film, if I recall correctly, is the longest roll of film you can get for that is 36 shots. So I would be done at that point right away in that Plaza de España with just the flamenco dancers. I'm able to shoot a couple of hundred pictures in a day. I mean, I have a camera planted on my face most of the time, but that would be it. So, and in the end, to get your pictures printed up, it would still end up, you would have your negatives professionally scanned, and then you would have them printed up. I still have my film camera. I still dabble with film, but the bulk of my stuff is either with my digital DSLR or even my cell phone camera.
Great. We've had another question that has just come in, and I'm going to read it so I get it correctly. I see two apps to choose from. Which one do you recommend? One says preset box filters. The other just says Snapseed.
I would choose that Snapseed. I'm not sure what the other link is, but definitely choose the Snapseed. It might take a little bit to learn at first, but once you get the swing of those menus and you can play around it, it's far better than just scrolling through Facebook, which is just filled with bad news. Just play with your own picture and fix them up. Add a little drama to them, make them more engaging.
Great. Another one that has just come in. When you're editing photos on your phone, what level of screen brightness should you have? This viewer typically has the brightness around 25%, but she doesn't think, or he doesn't think it would be ideal when you're modifying things like photo brightness, contrast, hues. Any tips for that, Thomas?
Oh, that's a good question, and I could go on a little bit about that. With your cell phone camera, you're never going to get a proper edit because you can't have that screen calibrated. So there was a mention right there with brightness, but aside from brightness, I know on my cell phone, I have an option to turn on this blue light filter. I think on the whole, those cell phone cameras have more of a bluish light. And when I turn that button on, it dims down the blue, makes it more yellow. So the whole idea of color correction, what I would suggest is you would have to play around and actually write down, okay, I edited this picture at 25% brightness. I would probably go more with 50, so right in the middle. So it's not too bright, not too dark. And then see what it would look like on other devices, or also to see what it would look like in print. And then you can fine tune it from that. But yes, color will always be a bit tricky that way, for sure with color. Lightness, darkness, not so much. I know when my camera's dimmed right down. So if I don't edit in the middle of the night when other people are trying to sleep. I will try and do it at around kind of a moderate brightness.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, another one. What would you find the best general setting on a DSLR for dark sky photography?
Oh.
They're sending the good ones today, Thomas.
They are sending good ones in, because that whole thing with night photography, well, quite honestly, for any sort of night photography or dark sky, you're always best with a tripod. Having said that, I can't tell you to how many countries I have dragged my tripod and then I have never used it. So there is that trade-off. But yes, it would be a tripod. If not, if you could set your camera down somehow. And then okay, so I'm going to get a little technical here. I'm assuming this person knows a little bit of the technical aspect, but you're dealing with 3 different numbers. You're dealing with the f-stop, the shutter speed, and the ISO, which is a bizarre thing in digital photography because it's actually based on film speed. So what you're trying to do, probably to reduce the noise and in any respect with that, is you probably would want to use a lower ISO. I have heard though that by default, a lot of those digital cameras, the true base ISO is something like 200 or 400 anyways, but you could try and set it down to 50 or 100. And then I think you're safe enough to open the aperture up, but I wouldn't open it all the way up, and then adjust for the shutter speed. I mean, that's the trade-off you're doing, is with those 3 numbers and trying not to get any camera shake to get a clear picture of the sky. So it's difficult. I don't know if it's necessarily the sky, it could be a city scene. Keep in mind, if it is a digital camera, you have the luxury of seeing the shot afterwards. And you could probably dial it down. Your camera will always compensate and try to make things, if it's too dark, it will make it brighter, or if it's too light, it will make it darker. So you can play with that. But if you are also using a digital DSLR, do all those settings and save it as a raw file. Then you can always edit that as well. You can adjust exposure at that point and contrast and all of those.
Great. And now we're going to kind of go in the other direction. And can you take a good photo with just a point and shoot camera, Thomas?
Definitely. My perfect example, I already warned Chuck, he might get some new followers. Chuck is the perfect example of that. All of his photos are point and shoot or cell phone, and they're amazing composition. I know he edits some of them, but not overly so. And I do use as well sometimes a point and shoot. I have an underwater point and shoot. Not always the best, but it does work for me, especially if you're going to some waterfall or something. And some of those point and shoots actually let you do save as a larger file format. And so you're not really restricted by that. You just don't have all the actual settings, but they're not bad. Depends on what you buy.
Great. The questions are just flowing in here. Do you do much black and white photography? And if so, are there any special techniques that you use, Thomas?
That's good. I don't as much anymore. Most of my work currently is actually very much color-based, but I have done black and white in the past. And that's one of the things I miss the most with film cameras, especially infrared film, which is the specialty film you'd have to get. You need a specialty filter to block out certain wavelengths of light. What you would do with black and white, there's also the trick of putting in the filter. So I'm going to look at this now more from the aspect, and I do one of these videos on this. I take a color photo and then I change it to a black and white. So you can always adjust for it afterwards. And it depends on the mood you're looking for. Is it something softer? Is it something harder? That would depend on what sort of filters you have, because in some of these editing software programs, you can dial up or dial down a certain color. So if I dial up a green, suddenly all of my grass and trees are white, and it would look like an infrared photo. And skies, again, to make it look like an infrared, I could take that blue and dial that down into a very dark blue. And when that comes out as black and white, that would look like an infrared. So yeah, no, I do have a tutorial on that. And I also do a toned image. That's all possible through that Snapseed, and you won't lose the image data. You could actually print that off, probably blow that up as well.
Great. What program would you suggest for editing photos on a laptop?
Oh. Well, I actually pay for mine, and but because I do use it, I use the Adobe Suite. So I do actually use Lightroom and Photoshop. I do know there is something else like Lightroom. I think it's called Capture or Capture One, something like that. It's great if you, the reason why I like my Lightroom, which is expensive, but any of these kind of that genre of light editing is, it's a database, catalog, and editing suite all in one. So I can catalog all my pictures. I did a count with all of my travel photography and everything. I have actually a file server I finally invested in. It has something like 88,000 images, many of them duplicates, many of them bad, but I need something to catalog them. I think though, if you're going to be using though a laptop and you want to just try it out for free, I would try something like I am using a Mac. I've never used any of the photo imaging software, but try some of the stuff that's built right in to a Mac. For a PC, I don't know. I would have to think about that, and I could get back to you later on that. So I will try to look for something that is free or moderately priced. But I do know Lightroom is a standard, and this other one named Capture One, or it's for the Capture One photography is our standards.
Perfect. So I see we're running down on the time here, but I think I have time just to ask a couple more questions.
Sure.
What can I do to have the foreground blurry while something further away in the photo is in focus?
That's a good trick. Well, now I'm going to answer this from both perspectives, from the cell phone and then from a digital DSLR. The cell phone would be tricky because it automatically wants to focus, and I don't think you can get away from that. But you can try and set your focus so that it's at a further distance away. But I think on the cell phone, you would be looking at something, there's a tool in Snapseed called Lens Blur, and it allows you to create that effect so that the foreground would be blurry. There's another name, tilt shift frame. That's another type of focusing where there's a blur kind of in the front and in back, and there's a focus in that. But with a DSLR, you have that option, and it is so much easier. You would keep your aperture open, so you would have a low f-stop, so like as low as you could go, and then you would focus off into the distance. So when I say f-stop low, it means something like f5 or around there, and that would open that up, and then focus in the distance, take your picture, and you will notice that the foreground is blurry. Again, this can all be solved again a little bit in digital editing, but it's great to get the best you can as your source image.
Perfect. Okay, I think the last question we will have is, do you have any techniques for using backdrops, Thomas?
Nothing in particular. It's sort of interesting. I am engaged in this one project that has almost now been postponed for 2 years. And it's to do portraits with backdrops. I would need a backdrop in order to do these portraits. I have invested in, I think I'm going to be getting those stands. I do have some paper background, but what I have done in the past, or a friend of mine has also done, is she just sort of gets extra fabric and she drapes it somehow. She does have certain stands and everything, but she's able to take a picture and mimic almost like a Renaissance painting, and you would swear that that background was something else, and it's just sheets of fabric draped properly. So what I have done, I have gone actually to fabric stores to look for just, I look in the remnants section or whatever's on sale for that sort of effect. The other thing you can do is if you are in an area where there are, or if you're in a bigger house where you can clear some area and then somehow use that as a background, but it is tricky. It's not an easy, there is no easy fix for that.
Great. And I'm going to slip one more question in.
Sure.
Can you give any tips for taking pictures of snow and ice during the blue hour?
Well, you might be better off during that blue hour. It is tricky. I remember having that problem when I was in Thunder Bay. I end up correcting for it mostly in the image editing software, but it depends again what you're using, if it's your phone or if it's a digital DSLR. You will have to remember that snow will always probably make the camera try and overcompensate and make it dimmer. But if it's already during the blue hour, that might even, I don't know, you might be okay with that. I am not sure. I haven't had a lot of experience with that. I do with my other camera shoot in the raw format, and I do edit for that. What I do try to do then with snow is I do try to get those different undulations or textures so that you can tell it's snow and just not a sheet of whiteness.
Well, I think we shall have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Thomas. Great tips, and I know that we've all learned a lot. And I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in and spending some time with us. We will have a survey that will be popping up, and we would ask that you take a few moments to complete that. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next time.